Hi, this is Dr. Poole, and this presentation is going to look at the epidemiology of cancer. Major insights into the causes of cancer can be obtained by epidemiologic studies at the population level that relate particular environmental, ethnic, hereditary, and cultural influences to the occurrence of specific neoplasms. So as we go through some of the neoplasms of particular organs or sites, I will introduce some of the epidemiologic observations about the different cancers. And this is important both in terms of understanding neoplasia and neoplasms, but also this is the kind of thing that finds itself onto the USMLE Step 1. So certain diseases are associated with an increased risk of developing cancer, and studying cancer at the population level also provides clues to the pathogenesis of cancer. In 2018, an estimated 1,735,350 new cases of cancer will be diagnosed in the United States, and we call this the incidence, or cancer incidence. So you can also express this as the number of new cases of cancer per population. Usually it's expressed per 100,000 persons. So in 2018, or between the years of 2011 and 2015, this incidence was 439.2 new cases of cancer per 100,000 men and women per year. An estimated 609,640 people will die from the disease in 2018. The number of cancer deaths is what we call cancer mortality, and this can also be expressed per population. So between 2011 and 2015, the cancer mortality rate was 163.5 per 100,000 men and women per year. Cancer mortality is higher among men than women. And when comparing groups based on race or ethnicity and sex, cancer mortality is highest in African American men and lowest in Asian or Pacific Islander women. This chart shows the estimated new cases for 2019 by cancer type. Both sexes are combined, this will come into play earlier, especially when we look at breast and prostate cancer. But you can see the top cancers by type, and I just listed the top approximately 20 just to give you an idea of the distribution. And these are cancers that will be covered in other parts of the hematology oncology course. Now let's compare that with the estimated cancer deaths for 2019, and you'll see when you compare them that they are slightly different, and we'll explore some of the reasons why of the differences between cancer incidence and cancer mortality. So you can see the number one cause of cancer deaths is lung and bronchus cancer, as opposed to the most number of new cases, which was breast. So you can look down this list, and this gives you an idea of the lethality of some of these cancers. Now, when we look at cancer worldwide, cancer is among the leading causes of death worldwide. In 2012, there were 14.1 million new cases and 8.2 million cancer-related deaths worldwide. 57% of new cases in 2012 occurred in less developed regions of the world, which include Central America and parts of Africa and Asia. 65% of cancer deaths also occur in these regions. Now you have to normalize that with, and it would be more useful to look at that per population. The number of new cancer cases per year worldwide is expected to rise by 23.6 million by 2030. It's a somewhat alarming statistic. One of the uses of epidemiologic studies is that you can look at the distribution of a particular cancer across the world and see differences in its geographic distribution. This is a map of breast cancer incidence, and you can see that breast cancer has a much higher incidence in North America and in Western Europe as compared to Africa and Southeast Asia. And cancer epidemiologists look at this data and try to then make some observations about associations, etc., to shed light on everything from healthcare delivery to the pathogenesis of disease. So what this table shows is a bar graph comparing breast cancer incidence versus breast cancer mortality. And you'll note, again, as reflected from the map, the geographic variability. This table actually has some nice sort of summaries between more developed regions and less developed regions. But one interesting thing, despite the wide discrepancy in incidence, is that the mortality is fairly similar across geographic areas. And you might ask yourself, why is there such a wide discrepancy in incidence, but the mortality is relatively similar? And these are the kind of questions that you can ask from epidemiologic studies. And you can do this for any cancer site. Most cancer risk factors as well as protective factors are initially identified in epidemiologic studies. In these studies, scientists look at large groups of people and compare those who develop cancer with those who don't. These studies may show that the people who develop cancer are more or less likely to behave in certain ways or be exposed to different substances compared to those who don't develop cancer. Although we know that genetic and environmental factors contribute to the development of cancer, environmental influences appear to be the most dominant risk factors for most cancers. The evidence supporting a central role for environmental factors can be found oftentimes in this wide geographic variation, like we saw with breast cancer, that exists in the incidence of specific forms of cancer. These studies on their own, however, do not prove causality or that a particular substance causes cancer, but it's good for generating hypotheses and questions. One of the most important risk factors for cancer is age, and as we'll see in a variety of different cancers, that cancer is a disease of aging, and the longer you're around on this world, the more likely you're to develop cancer at some point. And this is thought to be due to the accumulation of somatic mutations, which of course is related to interactions with other risk factors that we'll talk about, as well as another correlation in the decline in immune competence. And this will be explored in more detail when we look at the cellular and molecular hallmarks of cancer. So an important thing to know about when you're studying specific cancers is who gets these cancers. And one of these questions is, at what age do people develop cancer? So to emphasize this point, this is the rate of new cancers by age group, including all races and both sexes for cancer in the United States in 2016. And you'll note this curve going up, and peak incidence of people getting cancer is in their 70s and 80s. Chronic inflammation and infectious agents are another major risk factor. Cancer risk is increased in individuals affected by a variety of chronic inflammatory diseases, including those with infectious as well as non-infectious, usually autoimmune etiologies. As with any type of tissue injury, each of these disorders is accompanied by a compensatory proliferation of cells that serves to repair the damage, and the pathways that are involved in tissue repair and inflammation are the same pathways that are involved in cancer genesis and spread. So in some cases, the chronic inflammation may increase the pool of tissue stem cells, and these cells may be particularly susceptible to neoplastic transformation. Additionally, remember, activated immune cells produce reactive oxygen species that are directly genotoxic, as well as inflammatory mediators that may promote bystander cell survival, even in the face of genomic damage. Chronic epithelial injury often leads to metaplasia, which I'll discuss in more detail in another presentation on some of the general features of neoplasia. And if you remember, metaplasia is the replacement of one differentiated cell type with another cell type that's better able to withstand and survive the ongoing chronic inflammatory insult. However, over long periods of time, usually years to decades, these alterations may allow cells with potentially oncogenic mutations to survive, eventually leading to cancer. Also, immunosuppression is an important risk factor that's related. So patients who are immunosuppressed or immunodeficient, particularly those with deficiencies in T-cell immunity, are at increased risk for cancers, especially those caused by oncogenic viruses. We'll learn about oncogenic viruses as we discuss individual cancers. These virally associated neoplasms are mainly lymphomas, but also include certain important types of carcinoma like cervical cancer, as well as sarcomas. As indicated on the slide, there's a complex interplay between infection, immunity, and cancer. Of course, there's a wide variety of cancer-causing substances, which we call carcinogens. They can be found in the ambient environment, in the workplace, in our food, water, etc. If you look in the notes on the study guide, I include a partial, non-exhaustive table of some of the more important carcinogens and where they can be found, as well as a table looking at cancer types by site and some of the important carcinogens involved in cancers for those sites. Radiation is another important risk factor, particularly sunlight exposure or ultraviolet radiation is a critical cause of skin cancers. Diet is a somewhat conflicting and confusing area. Specific components of diet, as well as overall dietary patterns, have been studied in great detail in relation to the risk of cancer. Overall, dietary fat, fruits, vegetables, and fiber have not consistently been shown to affect cancer risk. However, these studies have brought out that certain dietary patterns, as well as intake of other nutrients, particularly certain micronutrients, may actually offer a degree of protection against certain malignancies. So as we study individual cancers, pay attention to certain dietary associations. Obesity shows a strong association with cancer risk. It's been estimated to cause about 20% of cancers. However, the relationship between obesity and cancer risk is complex, but associations between obesity and specific cancer types will be discussed further in individual topics that cover these specific cancers. And this is a very robust and fruitful area of research at current time. Hormones are an important risk factor for cancer, especially for breast and endometrial cancers, as we'll learn about. Lifetime exposure to estrogen stimulation increases the risk of both of these cancers. Alcohol is associated with increased risk of cancers of the oral pharynx, larynx, and esophagus, and often shows a potentiating or aggravating risk factor in conjunction with some of the other risk factors that we've talked about. Indirectly, alcohol can lead to cirrhosis of the liver, as you learned about in Food to Fuel, and this can greatly increase the risk of developing liver cancer. And finally, last but not certainly least, tobacco. Smoking contributes to an estimated 30% of all cancer-related deaths in the United States, and perhaps even more worldwide. Tobacco is a really interesting complex of carcinogens that act on multiple stages of carcinogenesis. The dangers of tobacco are most commonly and obviously associated with cigarette smoking, but also occurs with every other form of tobacco, including cigars, pipes, smokeless tobacco, as well as exposure or environmental exposure to secondhand smoke. We are all aware of tobacco being implicated in cancers of the lung, but it's also implicated in a wide variety of other cancers as well, which I've listed here. Okay, so that's epidemiology of cancer. A lot of fascinating stuff with this, but this is just to introduce you to these concepts, because we will look at the epidemiology of specific cancers as we move through this case and in future courses. Thanks.